you do that. So I'm excited to be with you and have this conversation today. Who knows Jimmy John's? Right? Everybody know Jimmy John's gourmet subs, right? Their mantra is what? Freaky fast, right? If you've heard any of their commercials or they're on the radio, they're always talking about how freaky fast they are. Well, I was in my hometown of Columbus, Ohio, which I know we have some Ohio folks, and I was if you know of Columbus, there's a place in downtown Columbus called Spark Space, which is a really creative get out of the office business retreat center where companies use it to get out of the office and have these kind of high-powered meetings, right? And so the founder of Spark Space had asked to have a meeting, so I come down to Spark Space to meet with him. And as like I'm walking into the space, he looks at me and he says, Jason, are you hungry? And it was about lunchtime, so I said, I can eat if you want to eat. And he said, let's do it. And he flipped open his laptop and he started ordering us 2 subs from Jimmy John's. And as he was typing in the order, I looked, and in their office, they had this giant dry erase board behind them. And it had the last 10 orders from Jimmy John's and the times next to them of how fast it took them to get there. And it was 8, 9, 10 minutes, which I thought was amazing. And so I'm like, all right, now I really want the subs. Let's test these folks. If they say they're freaky fast, let's see how freaky fast you are. So he hits he pays for it and he hits the submit button. And as soon as he does that, I pull out my stopwatch because I'm like, all right, this is a fun game. And I start the stopwatch. We stand up from our chairs. We go walking down the hallway. We go into this really creative room, and they have these cool couches, and we're going to have this high-powered meeting, right? Fill up my coffee mug, come over, and right as I'm sitting down, just start crossing my legs. We're about to have this meeting, and all of a sudden, this dude comes running into the space. Running, and he's got his sock, tucked into his pants, or his pants tucked into his sock like that, And he comes running in, and he's holding this bag, and he's panting, and he goes, Jimmy John's! Into the room. And so I hit the stopwatch. 3 minutes and 47 seconds. Wow. 3 minutes and 47 seconds, this guy was standing in front of us, handing us subs. I'm looking at him the best time on there was 8, 9, 10 minutes, which I thought was amazing. And I'm looking at this guy, and so I said, hold on a second. You're telling me you all took the order, you made the subs, you packaged them up, they handed them to you, the delivery guy, who evidently tucked his pants into his sock because he ran outside, he jumped on his bike. You rode 2 blocks down the street, you jumped off your bike, you ran into the building, and you came up to the 2nd floor, and you're handing us our subs in 3 minutes and 47 seconds? And he looked at me and he goes, well, yeah, I could have shaved at least 20 seconds off my time if I knew you were timing me. I looked at him, I was like, dude, that's freaky fast. This is freaky fast. You all know this, but the world that we live in right now is freaky fast. The world that we live in right now on an everyday basis is freaky fast and is only getting faster, right? But I want us to let Jimmy John's be freaky fast. What I want to invite us to think about, and hopefully what you're doing these next couple of days, is I want you to allow yourself, don't worry about being freaky fast. We know in this world that we've got to be quick but not hurry. But I want you to let Jimmy John's be freaky fast. And what I want to invite you into thinking about today and into these next couple of days is not what does it mean to be freaky fast, but what does it truly look like and feel like for you to be thoughtfully great? What does it mean as a leader, and as we're talking about today, somebody who is helping to begin to shape a culture? What does it mean not to be freaky fast, but to actually be thoughtfully great in what you do? And what does that look like? And what does that mean for you as a leader of how you show up to the work that you do? Because this is the world that we live in right now, right? Which, other than the very out-of-date BlackBerry that you see in that photo, this is the world that we live in right now, where we as human beings, which is at the beginning of this conversation today, this is the place where I think we have to begin. We as human beings, leaders or whatever role you are in your company, anybody throughout your company, we as human beings have never been busier, more cluttered, and distracted in the history of the world than we are right now. There's all kinds of statistics that will show us this. We as human beings have never been more distracted in the history of time than we are right now. I'm sure I can't be the only crazy one that's having this conversation, but I had it with some of you last night, so I won't point you out and tell you which ones. But I have this in every single team and organization that I'm lucky to walk into around the world. This same conversation, tell me if you're having the same thing. So Mike and I run into each other, and it doesn't matter what Mike does, it's every organization I walk into. And I say, hey Mike, how you doing? And Mike looks at me and goes, oh man, I'm so busy. How are you, Jason? And I go, oh, yeah, right. And I look back and then he says, how are you doing, Jason? I said, oh man, I'm so busy. You're busy? Yeah, I'm busy too. All right, man, see you, right? And then we walk away from each other. Anyone else? I'm the only weirdo having that same conversation with everybody? That somehow in the world right now, and I can tell you it's an epidemic within teams and organizations, that we are coming to honor this term busyness. That somehow we're equating in our minds that if I say to Mike that I'm busy, that somehow that means I'm really good at what I do, I'm such a big deal, I got so much going on, I don't have time for this, right? Somehow it means that I'm really good at what I do, or it's a filler. Because it keeps us from then, I don't have to share anything of significance with Mike. I can just say I'm busy and we get away from each other and go on our day, right? And yet, it's not showing up that, when we look at statistics, it's not showing up that way of the way that we perform and the way that we show up with the people around us. We're buying into this myth that busyness equates to effectiveness. The Harvard Business Review, they did a study not too long ago. They studied thousands and thousands of people that they deemed to be the modern worker today. So not only representing all of us, but everybody that works within your company. Thousands and thousands of people that they studied. And what they use is a software tool called Rescue Time for this study. And all it did is track how many times in an average day did the modern worker start one task and then shift their focus and their attention and jump over here and start working on something else. Start one thing, and then something pops in their head and jump over here. And all it would do is tally how many times in squirrel syndrome. How many times in an average day does the modern worker start something and then shift their focus and their attention to something else, right? And what they found is that the modern worker today is shifting their focus and their attention anywhere between 300 to 500 times in an average day, which didn't even include smartphones. 300 to 500 times in an average day, we're painted this image that the modern worker today has like 5 different things up on their computer screen, right? And they're working on one thing, they're pounding away, and then all of a sudden something jumps in their head, right? And they say, oh, geez, I gotta work on this other thing. And so they minimize that one, and then they jump over here, and they're like, oh yeah, I gotta start working on that. And all of a sudden the ding on the email goes off, and so they're like, oh, geez, I gotta get to that. And so they start firing away, I gotta respond right away. So start punching away on that, and then all of a sudden somebody's knocking on their door, and they turn around, hey, how you doing? And then a text goes off, and then they realize, oh, geez, I got to be stapling things, and so they're running around the office just randomly stapling packets. And it painted this image that the modern worker today is just spinning all day long, and yet all these thousands of people that they studied, when they asked them, hey, how are you performing on the job? How's your performance? For the job that you have, the mission that you've been given, how are you performing? Their response was, great. I'm so busy. Great. How are you performing on the job? Their response was, great. I'm so busy. That somehow in our minds, we're honoring this term busyness, and we're getting trapped into this thinking that the faster I run, the further I get. And the reality is, the results of the study then, as the Harvard Business Review, after all these thousands of people they studied, all these people who thought they were being all this, with all this busyness, they were being super effective, the result of the study is then they came back to them and said, what it's leading to is about a 30% productivity rate. About 30% of the time, as they looked at the task and the real mission of whatever the role is that they were there to accomplish, about 30% of the time were they actually being effective at accomplishing what it is that they're there to do. And so we're busy, but we absolutely are not effective. And so as we start to begin talking about culture today, the way we have to begin, in my opinion, is we got to step back and allow ourselves to make sure that we're not perpetuating this freaky fast world, that we're actually stepping back to say, not what does busyness look like, but what is it truly going to look like for us as leaders, and then the culture we begin to set for the people around us to not be busy, but to be effective. And all of that depends on what gets our eyes. Has anybody here ever been surfing? Not like the internet, the real in water. All right, you actually look like you could do that. I have never been surfing. You like it? So a friend of mine wanted to learn how to surf, and so went out to the beach to sign up for this course, and they're standing there with their surfboards, right? And there's like 20 people in the course, and they're all standing there. And the instructor, for the first, they all want to learn how, and so the first thing he has them do is he lays their surfboards down on the sand, and he has them lay on their bellies on the beach. And for the first 5 minutes of the class, all he has them do is, jump up on the surfboard, and he's showing them this is how you get up onto the surfboard. And so the first 5 minutes was just up, down, up, down. And all of a sudden, after about 5 minutes of doing that, he looked at him and he said, okay, if you want to learn how to surf, you got to know one thing. You got to know one thing. And they all kind of stopped and they huddled together and like, okay, buddy, if all we have to do is know one thing, can you hurry up and tell us the one thing? Because we paid the money for the course. I want to be out there in the waves looking like Mario Lopez or whoever that is. Like, I want to be looking cool, right? And so I said, okay, you want to know the one thing? Here you go. Where you look is where you go. Where you look, your body will follow. He said, in just a couple of minutes, we're going to quit pretending to surf here on the beach. We're going to quit pretending here. We're going to actually go out there in the waves. And what I can promise you is that the first time that you pop up on that surfboard for real in the waves, that if where you start looking is all the things that are crashing around you, all the things that are trying to steal your attention, distract you, if all your own doubts, your own fears, if you start looking down in the water wondering when Jaws is going to come up and get you, he said, I promise you that where you look, your body will follow, and you'll go right back down in the water. But the moment you actually start surfing for real for the first time, it will be because you start training your eyes and your mind right now while we're on the beach, before you even get out there in the water, before you even go into that important meeting, before you even leave, go into that boardroom, before we start training our eyes and our minds right now, before you even get out there, to train yourself that as soon as you pop up on that board, you got to shift your eyes right to the shoreline. Because where we look is where we go. Where we look, our bodies will follow. The reason I love that image is because if we as human beings have never lived in a more cluttered, busy, and distracted time in the history of the world than we do right now, then it's never been more important for us as human beings, let alone leaders, and the ones that are starting to begin to try to mobilize people to create a culture, it's never been more important for us to make sure what has to get our eyes, our focus, our attention, our hearts today. And as we'll talk about today, the very best in the world, the ones that are creating compelling cultures, that are not, there is no perfect culture out there, but the ones that are creating compelling cultures are the ones that are relentless about what has to get our eyes. That it's not an add-on, it's not an extra thing we do, but what has to get our eyes, our focus, our attention, our hearts today, and then are relentless about this week, this month, this quarter, this year, because where we look is where we go. Every team and organization that I work with and help support in developing a leaders and culture in this clarity around mission, vision, values, I say to them all the time that conversations are the currency for change. In the most distracted time in the history of the world, I'm more convinced of this than ever. If you want anything to change in your personal life or with the group, the team of people that you work with every single day, the only way things begin to change is whether we're willing to talk about it. Of whether, because what's easier is we all just scatter and go our different directions and everybody just go do your job. And yet the reality is when we step back and come together and actually have a conversation, it's the currency for change. And so simply we have to be willing to talk about it. So here's what I want you to do, just a little 2-minute challenge here. I want you to turn to one person just right near you. And I want you to ask these questions, because we want this. The purpose of these 2 days is for you to get, you're away from the office, for you to step back, for you to have some time for you to think, right? And not just be busy, but to be effective. And not be freaky fast, but be thoughtfully great. So I want you to turn to somebody next to you, and I want you to just focus on these two questions. We all live in this world that I was describing. We all live in it. We all have distractions, so none of us are separate from it. What are the things right now that are stealing your attention? What are the biggest distractions for you right now that are maybe keeping you from being your most effective self? And then, as you step back and think about your role and what's on the horizon, what needs your eyes? What needs your focus? Coming up next. None of us are separate from the world that I was describing earlier, that our effectiveness as leaders and then as people charged with beginning to shape the culture that we want with the people around us, that our success in doing that is going to be defined by what gets our eyes and our focus and our attention, and our ability to say, how do we shift? What is it that needs our eyes, our focus, our attention, and then what are we willing to do about that every single day? The reality is that things are changing. So every team and organization that I walk into, oftentimes when companies say, hey, Jason, will you help? We want to change our culture. The first thing that I say back to them is, well, your culture is already changing. So the question isn't, is it changing? It is. It's changing moment by moment right now while we sit in this room. In fact, the culture of this group and in this room is changing moment by moment right now the more time we spend together. The culture in this room is changing. So the question isn't, is it changing? The question is, what role are we going to play in what it becomes? And that all of us play a role in helping it, shape it to what we want it to become. And oftentimes, part of that depends on what's going to get our eyes and which way we're going to look. And whether we're going to get caught only looking in the rearview mirror. There are some leaders, there are entire teams, there are organizations that get stuck where all they're looking is in the rearview mirror of where they were yesterday, of what happened yesterday, of where we've been as a company, of the great culture that we had yesterday. And we know we have to peek at the rearview mirror every once in a while because we got to learn from where we've been, and we've got to remember what it took to get there, and we've got to have our eye on that. But we can't get fixated only with our eyes in the rearview mirror, or else where will we go? Well, maybe backwards if we put it in reverse, right? But we'll just sit there, and or we'll get in an accident. And so we'll peek in it every once in a while, but the companies and organizations and the leaders that you see that are effectively shaping their culture because they know that it's always changing are the ones that spend most of their energy looking out that windshield. Not in the rearview mirror, but the windshield. And saying, what has to get our eyes? Where is it that we're trying to go tomorrow that doesn't exist yet? If we want to shape our culture, what is it that we want it to become? That handsome devil right there, not me, but the other guy, is Howard Behar, who's a former president of Starbucks. I've been really lucky that he's become a great friend and mentor to me and has been engaged with the kind of stuff that I'm doing. One of the first conversations, and by the way, Howard was the president of Starbucks when nobody knew who Starbucks was outside of Seattle. They had 15 stores, and nobody outside of Seattle knew who Starbucks was. And then he and his team led them to 15,000 stores around the world. So grew it in this amazing amount where Starbucks was on every corner, right? And one of the first things that he shared with me, he said, Jason, I don't care what it is you do in the world. Your success is not going to be defined by what you do, but it's going to be absolutely defined by how you do it. He said, we got really clear at Starbucks from the very beginning that it wasn't about the coffee. We knew we had to spend a lot of research and development and time and energy. We got to go find the best beans and stuff around the world, and we got to have a good product, of course. But we realized from the very beginning it wasn't about the coffee. Really what it was about is we had to, in every single one of our stores, we had to create a culture that as soon as somebody stepped foot on their property, we were going to be intentional about what is that experience and that culture that we were going to shape for them. And so from when they stepped foot on our property, from how clean it was, to when they opened the door and they walked in, to what was the music we were playing in the background, to the way that we arranged the seating, because it wasn't just about having a cup of coffee, it was about coming together in their mind to have the best conversation of your life. to the way that the barista would welcome you and say, what may I get started for you, to the little messages we put on the cup, to everything was intentional about how we trained our people to create a culture and create an environment, because we realized that the culture is being shaped moment by moment every single day. So it's dynamic, which means it's always changing. So anytime, any company right now that you think, oh, they've got a great culture, if what they realize is like, we did that, we're done, got a great culture, that's the sign that that is not going to be great tomorrow. They're looking in the rearview mirror. The best cultures and the best leaders are the ones that realize that this is a process, and culture is being shaped moment by moment every single day by the way we think, act, and interact. Which is why our mindset, I mean, even that little video you showed earlier, you know, by James or Jason, Jason Mitchell. I should know Jason. That's my name. The same thing he was talking about is that our mindset, how we think about what we do when we show up. And this is why teams and organizations that spend enormous energy, what has to get our focus and our mind and our eyes is, how are we thinking when we come together? And so this is why we'll talk about today. Well, this is why, you know, we put core values up on the wall. This is why we come up with those statements, so that we can begin to shape when we show up. We don't all think the same. We're not supposed to be robots, but yet we need to be aligned that when we come together, not just what we do, but how we do it, we are aligned in our thinking about what we do. And then from our thinking, do we follow that up with individual actions? If you as the CEO, you as the head honcho, or anybody on your leadership team, or somebody on the front level of your company, of not just the way they think when they show up to the work, but when nobody's watching, or everyone's watching, do they show up and do they bring that thinking into action? Do they set that temperature for this is the way that we move? And so it's shaped by the way we think and the way we act, but then every little interaction that we have, every little interaction with our staff, every little interaction that happens throughout our staff, every interaction we have with a client, a vendor, that person in the coffee shop, the random person in our community where we're wearing the shirt that represents our company, every single one of those interactions is shaping the culture that we have. And the question is, do we know what it is we even want? Because the culture is being shaped. But the question is, are we clear about what it is we even want it to be? So, my book, Thermostat Cultures, which you all get a copy of today, which is in the back before you leave. And I think we have enough that what I'll encourage you to do is take one for you, and then take another one and give it to somebody on your team. Somebody that you want to give a gift to, take it, and that's a gift to you, free, for you. Give it to them and say, this is something that I want us to begin to talk about. Because the reason why it's called Thermostat Cultures is this. We know the difference between a thermometer and a thermostat, right? A thermometer does what? Tells the temperature, right? So if there was a giant thermometer in the room right now, all it would do is react to the external conditions, and it would just tell us the temperature. It would just read the temperature to us, right? All it would do. And so if we kept putting more and more people in this room, it would just react to the external conditions. It would tell us it's hotter in the room now, and the temperature would go up. And if everybody left the room, it would react and it would go down. There are too many individual leaders, but entire teams and companies that get stuck in this thermometer thinking, where we get stuck and all of our efforts become very reactionary. And so the culture and the experience we start to create with the people around us on our team is, if we don't have clarity around what it is we're even trying to create together, then we fall into this thermometer thinking that's just purely reactionary. And the culture we end up creating is just depending on who's in the room, how I'm feeling today, is it raining outside, I don't know, what happened externally, and we just react to it, right? And entire teams and companies, the culture, because again, the culture is always being shaped, the culture they start shaping is, the experience people have with them is very scattered and inconsistent. And in thermometer thinking leaders and organizations, what it leads to is a kind of knee-jerk reactions and a lot of rushing to judgments, because something happens and we just react to it, right? And what it often leads to in our boardrooms and in our meetings and in the meetings you don't even know about, is that when people come together and something hasn't gone our way, something wasn't successful, something's happening, the way that people that show up in this thermometer thinking show up to that meeting is they come with who's to blame, and it's always someone else's fault. And their entire organizations, that's the culture they have. I can tell you, I've been in some of them. The culture is they show up to the board meeting or the important meeting, and the culture they've created is everybody comes in, and it's all about this game of pushing the blame to somebody else, and it's always someone else's fault. But the best in the world, as you study this and watch, what are the best places doing? They don't operate in thermometer thinking. Their mindset is not a thermometer, it's a thermostat. Because a thermostat does what?
Regulates.
Sets the temperature, controls the temperature, regulates the temperature, right? Which means an individual leader or a team or an entire organization has to have clarity around what is the temperature we're even trying to set. Because if I can't describe to you, this is the kind of culture we're trying to have, the kind of environment, if we can't even describe it to one another, then we can't be surprised when it doesn't exist. And so the best in the world, they have clarity around, this isn't just what we do. We don't just sell coffee. This is how we do it. And this is how we're going to show up every single day as leaders and as the people that are thinking, acting, and interacting is going to set a temperature that proactively sets that. And so the companies and the leaders and the teams that operate in this thermostat thinking mindset, the experience people then begin to have with that culture is it's not scattered and inconsistent, but it's intentional and purposeful. Because the leadership team has gone through the process to say, no, this is what we're committed to. We don't just make widgets. We don't just do this. We don't just whatever that is. This is how we're committed to doing it. And we want you to hold us accountable as well of how we think, act, and interact every single day. And so it's not scattered and inconsistent. It's intentional and purposeful. It's not just knee-jerk reactions or rush to judgments. It's stepping back to seek to understand, okay, what needs our eyes now? And the leaders and the teams and the organizations that start to function in this kind of thinking, the response, the experience they end up having is when something doesn't go well, because that happens in every team and organization on the planet, when we weren't successful, we fell short, we didn't do something, instead of everybody showing up to the table saying who's to blame and it's somebody else's fault, thermostat cultures show up with the mindset of thinking solutions focused. What role do I play, no matter what my role is, in helping us find a solution? And I'm willing, I may not be able to solve the whole problem by myself, but I'm willing to be part of the solution. What are we going to do? And instead of spinning their wheels and all this who's to blame, they're down the road saying, okay, well, what needs to get our eyes, our focus, and our attention next? And how are we going to be able to set a different temperature next time? You all know this, but you are the thermostats. You're the beginning. You're not the only thermostats. And in fact, the companies and organizations that are the best is that they realize that the business they're in is actually in developing and training and leading and creating more thermostats. That they're committed. They say, it's not just about me, the head honcho on top, but I realize I need to be, my internal temperature is going to begin to set an external temperature for the people around me. And what I'm going to get in the business of is how we develop our people to develop at every level of the way we think, act, and interact, and begin to say, this is the temperature to involve them, which I'll talk about here in a minute, involve them in the process of saying, you are as valuable as anybody in helping us set the temperature that we want, but we got to know what it is. And language helps drive behavior. And so every company on the planet says they have core values, and many of them obviously do, right? And I can tell you that there's many companies that I've walked into where, again, they want help with shaping the culture that they have at their organization. And I say, well, tell me about what your values are as a company. And they point to that big wall right over there. And in big letters, they've got this amazing, and it says integrity, right? Across the wall, and I'm like, oh, wow, that looks sweet. And then I look at them and I say, tell me what it looks like in action and behavior, no matter what my role is in this company, to live and to work with integrity. What's that look like in action and behavior? And they say, well, blah, 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 integrity, right? It means integrity. Doesn't that sound good, right? And so I said, the point of it is not, do we have core values? And it's not about having posters, although having it out in front of everybody is an important thing, so that because where we look is where we go. But the question isn't, do we have posters? The question is, are our posters in our people? Are our posters coming off of the wall, and can they look at that and be able to say, what does it look like in action and behavior to live and work with integrity here? One of my clients right now is one of the largest in the country providers of Andersen windows. They install and distribute all these Andersen windows across the country. And what they realize is, even though they had done this maybe 10 years ago, they realized that with new employees and new growth and all this stuff, that language that they had years ago was kind of old and stale and just wasn't really representative of that culture that they want to create out the windshield. And so what we started to do is to dive into this process to be able to say, okay, well, what is that? And not just from the CEO on the top, but to involve cross-functionally people in their entire company to be a part of it, to say, well, what is that culture that we want to create? And make sure that we're making those links. It's not just integrity, but what is that? How do we define that? And what does that look like in action and behavior? So that then we can use that not as a poster, but as a tool to say, okay, how are we going to go set this temperature? So language helps drive behavior as a tool. So conversation for the currency of change. So here's what I want you to do now. And you may be sick of the person that you just were talking with, which I'm sorry, right? No, you're not. But if you would like to, you can turn to the person on the other side of you now. If you want another fresh, or if you were riveted by the conversation you were having earlier, you can stay with the same people. But I want you to turn to somebody else. And here are the questions I want you to think about. So how will you, and I would give you a second to also reflect on how are you right now setting the temperature with the people around you? And does your company not just have core values, meaning you've got it written on a wall somewhere, but do you have values and language that's going to help drive behavior that is linked to action and behavior, that defines it? And again, there's no judgment in asking this question. I know sometimes in this kind of setting we're protective, like want to make sure we're doing it right. Throw that out the window and step back from it and say, do we have the language, and are we leveraging it as a tool and not just a poster that we pull out every once in a while or we look at once a year? Turn to somebody next to you. A little 2-minute challenge. Go for it. So again, I asked those questions again with zero judgment. But what I know is that a common mistake that happens in every team and organization is we start to get to a point where we take our eye off the ball a little bit and we focus it in because there's all kinds of places that need our focus and our attention. And what starts happening is and I hear this back from companies was, well, everybody already knows what our culture is or should be, and we start to assume that everybody just gets it and everybody knows, and yet what you see is the places that are the best are the ones that are committed to this ongoing process to make sure we're finding new ways to involve people and help them understand their role in setting that temperature. And that it's not just about what you want, but it's about what we want together. That across the entire company, what is it that we want? And so there's a difference between a scattered and an intentional culture. So anybody ever seen a tree that looks like that? I got a couple in my yard, that look just like that, right? And this tree right here will grow as long as it gets what? 2 things. Water and sunlight, right? As long as it gets water and sunlight, that tree is going to continue to grow and just branch out in whatever direction it wants, right? As long as it gets those 2 things. And so that tree will be fine. And if it's unkept, it'll just kind of keep going, right? Well, there's some companies that start to operate like that tree. That the culture that ends up, because culture is always being shaped, it's always changing, always developing, that, there's some companies that are just kind of keeping the lights on and just keep going, right? And the culture that they end up creating, as long as they get sunlight and water, it'll just kind of keep growing. And it's fine. But there's a difference between that and a tree that looks like that. This is actually a tree from Thailand. I was in I was in Thailand to speak at this global leadership conference with entrepreneurs from all around the world. All these people that are doing amazing things. And the whole day, the topic I was talking about was proactively shaping culture. And after I'd given this speech, I was out walking around this amazing resort, that was just had these views of like 360 degrees, like, oh my gosh, this place exists, right? And I'm walking around, and on the property, I was just reflecting on this great conference. Like, I'm walking around, I started to notice that every single tree on this property was this amazing, like, tree. Now, I'm not an arborist or anything, but it was just amazing. And then as I came around this corner, I saw these two little guys that were down on their hands and knees, and they had these little wooden beams, and they were down there and they were tapping and putting in these support beams around the trunk and the first branches of the trees, of every tree on the property. And the reason is because they can't make those trees grow. They're going to grow as long as they get sunlight and water. But what they realize is the only way they can help shape the tree and help it grow in the general direction that they want is that they had to be intentional about putting the support beams in place to help the tree grow in the general direction that they want it to grow. And I almost came out of my flip-flops. I was like, oh, God, I wish I had that image a day earlier, right? Because the best companies are the ones that realize that the tree's growing already, but what are those support beams that we're going to put into place intentionally and proactively so that it continues to grow in the direction that we want it to grow in. And so you'll see in the book that I talk about one of the ways that we intentionally set that temperature, and the best places in the world do that, is that they realize they follow what I refer to as the 6A process for leading change. Is that that's just the way things change. And anybody who's studied change theories and stuff, it all follows the same pattern. The way we as individuals change, the way we bring about positive change for ourselves and for the people around us, it all follows the same pattern. But it's whether or not we intentionally go on the process to help things change. And the reason why those arrows go the way they do is because it never stops. The shaping of the culture never stops, but the best are the ones that are putting those support beams in place intentionally, and it follows that pattern. That the first A is we have to be able to step back and assess, all right, let's be honest with ourselves for current day, what's going well in our culture? And not just your own assessment, but the best places are the ones that get their people involved and help them assess, all right, well, where are we now? What are we doing well? What are we not doing well? What are our opportunities? We have to understand where are we on the map right now. We got to assess that. And then they realize that this culture shaping thing is not a drive-through experience. It's not a one-time. I went to this one seminar one time and it was great. It's not that. They understand that this is a process, right? Which is the effectiveness of this entire organization, right? It's not a one-time thing, it's an ongoing relationship. And all of it is about aligning our people, engaging the minds and hearts of the people that are in your business, so that it's not just about what they do, but they're engaged in how they do it. And so we have to intentionally create environments to involve them and engage their mind and heart, not just in the work, but in what is this culture that we're trying to create together, so that we can aspire. Which means we have to be able to paint the vision out that windshield of, well, if we assess where our culture is now, what is it we want it to be? What doesn't exist right now in our culture? What is it we want? And I've done this process with leadership teams that say, you know what, we're not accountable, or we don't communicate well, or we don't, whatever those things are. Okay, well, let's paint the vision of what would it look like for us to raise the level of accountability or communication here. We got to be able to paint that vision of what it's going to look like, so that then we have to articulate it. Which means, again, back to values, if we can't articulate what it means, then why would we be surprised when it doesn't exist? So we've got to be able to tell the story of, this is what we're trying to do together. And then we've got to connect it to action. We've got to say, okay, what are those support beams we're going to actually put into place so that people see that this isn't just talk, this is action. And lastly, we've got to anchor it, which means it's not a one-time thing, but we have to create habits and put those beams into place throughout our organization, in our processes, and in our programs, and in the things we do every day that are going to anchor the values that we say is important. And some of the ways that we do that is we have to, then the way we anchor it is we got to make sure that we have consistent messaging and we're consistently developing that message and our people. And so by the way we hire, again, if we can't articulate it to somebody when they're starting to work with us, then we can't be surprised when, a few months in, let alone 7 years in, they're not operating in the manner that we want culturally. So it's got to be a part of the support beam is how we even hire. To then how we onboard. There's an organization that I'm working right now, about 3 years into a whole culture shaping initiative across their entire company. And what we realized is in their company, if people leave, retention challenges, they typically leave in the first 3 weeks to 3 months. First 3 weeks to 3 months. And they're seeing this trend, especially with younger generation. They're seeing this trend. And so what you realize is part of the culture shaping is not only how they hire and what is the process and how do they hire them, not just can you do this, but culturally what's expected of you and what we want you to be a part of. But then what's that experience from day 1 to day 15 to day 30 to day 90, 365? What is that onboarding process that brings them into that culture so it's not just about what they do, but it is about how they do it? To performance evaluations, tying not just actions, but what are the behaviors that we want? Not just did you accomplish the task, but did you do it in the way that's setting the temperature for our clients, our vendors, our internal staff, whatever that may be. To ongoing leadership and culture development. That the senior leadership team, the best companies in the world, they understand that at their senior level, they have to continue to develop these things. Because it's not just everybody else's problem, it's our problem. And our opportunity to make sure. To identifying emerging leaders. Who are those people who've had great success in companies of being able to identify where are those next level people that are the future? And then, how do we want to begin to train them now so that 5 years from now, 10 years from now, they're already leading the culture that we wanted. Not just wait till they get there and then hope that that's going to happen. But those are the support beams, some of the support beams that begin to put into place. But let me remind you of a couple of things that as you start to think about, well, if you were going to take some of this back and begin to think about leading that 6 A's in your company, let me give you a couple of just reminders of not just what you do, but how you begin to do that. Do you know that right now in the world, we live in a more participatory culture than ever? Like, the people who are working, not only us in this room, but the people that work in your companies, outside of your walls, when they are not at work, their lives, we as humans are now functioning in a participatory world, more than ever. And let me explain what I mean by that. Let me share a couple of pop culture references that would make this point. So Starbucks, right? Starbucks was the first one that showed us this, and I've verified this with Howard, that they were the first ones that made us realize that people don't just want a cup of coffee. They realize that people want to participate in that experience. And so I still think I'm the only person on the planet that goes into Starbucks still and walks up there and they, what may I get started for you? And I just look at them and I said, black coffee. I just want black coffee. And they look at me like, no, but what do you want? I'm like, I just want a black coffee. That's all I want, right? Because what they want you to do is they want you to say, I'd like a double soy latte with mulch or whatever it is. Whatever you sickos put in your drinks, right? No, of course not.
Use Grande.
Yeah, Grande, yeah. They want you to participate in the creation of your own cup of coffee. So that when they get down to the end of the line and they read out your name on the cup, it's not just a cup of coffee, it's your cup of coffee. And then what they realize is people line up at the door because they don't just want coffee, they want to participate in this creation of their own cup of coffee. Okay, let me give you some other examples of this. Fantasy football. Any other weirdos out there like me that are totally into fantasy football, right? Did you know fantasy football is a $71 billion with a B dollar business and growing every day? 71 billion with a B. So why is it that idiots like me and my friends a couple weeks ago, flew into Memphis, just picked a random city, and because we're all across the country, we all met to have our draft, because we're idiots and we want to have fun and drink some beers, and it's because we love football, But we don't want to just watch football. We want to participate. We want to pick the players, right? And we want to watch on a Sunday. We want to see, where do we value players? Are they undervalued or are they overvalued, right? We want to share in that, participate in that experience. And it's a $71 billion business and growing. How about Chipotle, right? Another example of this, the leader by a mile in that industry. They were the ones that kind of created that fast casual dining even industry. Well, so do you walk into Chipotle and you say, give me a burrito? They'd look at you and say, well, what is it you want, right? Because they want you to go down the line and say, give me some of that, no, a little of this, none of that, right? And at the end of the line, it's not just a burrito, it's your burrito, right? Anybody have the Waze app?
Oh, yeah.
Right, Waze? So for those of you that have it, how is Waze different than almost every other GPS app that's on the market?
It tells you where the police are.
It tells you where the police are. It tells you the potholes are. It tells you there's a car on the road or on the berm ahead or whatever, right? But how does it get its information?
From you. Other people.
So different than other GPS apps that just take a satellite image and every so often they just update it and it says, oh, it looks like there's traffic, right? Waze is dependent on every single person that has the app and in real time are all participating and sharing whether you think it's safe or not or saying, oh, there's a car on the side of the road, there's a pothole here, there's a police officer here, and everybody is participating and sharing this information and creating it in real time, okay? And lastly, social media, right, is the greatest example of this. Is there are the recent studies, 2.03 active billion users on social media every single day, and growing, of course. And many studies show that the average person's on about 2 to 3 hours a day. Why are people on social media? Whether you think it's good or bad or whatever, why are people on it? Because they want to post things, right? And they want to like things. And then we want to share them, right? And we want to comment. I want to tell you what I think about it, right? And then all these people are sharing and participating in this social experience because they want to participate. So why is it that I'm sharing all those examples to you? Why even share any of that? What does that mean?
We all want to be connected in some way.
We all want to be connected in some way? Why else?
Your employees want to have feedback into your culture. It's not just when you're not out.
That's right. If we operate outside of those walls, that the world that we live in every single day, and again, this is, we talk about generationally, this is just the way they're moving throughout the world. And then yet when they come to work, they're meant to just like take off this kind of thinking and then just like do what you tell them to do. That what do we think that leads to? Disengagement? Am I truly connected to it? Am I just doing a job? And what it ends up is disengagement, disconnection, and divisiveness that begins to happen. And so the best places in the world that are shaping their culture are realizing that the way people operate outside our walls is a participatory world, which means we as leaders have the opportunity within our walls to say, how do we involve them and get, even if it takes extra effort, that's the way they think and the way they want to think. And oh, by the way, they want to share in the creation of your cup of coffee. And whether we're going to invite them into doing it. And so with companies and organizations that we've redefined, like the Anderson Windows one I was giving you an example, that we've redesigned their core values and then helped put programs and support beams in place to say, okay, how do we begin to live these things? The way we did it was not just, oh, by the way, the CEO one day went in his office and sat there and was like, okay, well, here, I think we're going to change this, right? Or the board said, here's what we're going to do. We gathered, with some companies, it's been hundreds of people throughout their cross-functionally across their company. But even if it's a smaller company, even just down to let's make sure we've got cross-functional representation and let's involve them in the process of saying not just what do I want, what do you want? What do we want? What is the culture that we want to create tomorrow out that windshield? And we want you to help participate in the creation of that cup of coffee. And as we get clear and as they get involved and as they participate, what happens? Does their level of engagement go up or down? Up, right? Because when we participate, that all of a sudden I can't complain about the burrito not being good, unless there's something wrong with the ingredients, but the ingredients that I put in there. And so I now am more committed to that experience. However, the single biggest problem with communication is the illusion that it's taken place. Right? The single biggest problem with communication is the illusion that it's taken place. And so we walk around in our teams and organizations, again, in our own heads. We think we've communicated something. We think we've involved people and helped them participate. And yet, the single biggest problem with communication is the illusion it's taken place. And so, and again, in a freaky fast world, it's way easier to just be scattered and inconsistent and not take the time to have the conversations. And yet, your culture is being shaped moment by moment every day, not only by the messages you're sharing, but the messages that all the people throughout your culture are sharing. And you want to make sure that the messages they're sharing, the single biggest problem with communication, is not the illusion that it's taken place. And so, this happens in every culture. In every group dynamic on the planet, this happens. And let me explain what I mean by this. Is person A and person B within your culture, within your staff? I mean, this, of course, doesn't happen in any years. Yes, it does. It happens in every culture in the world. Person A and person B have a disagreement, a personality conflict, a project didn't go the way they hoped would. Something happens between person A and person B. Tell me your name? Kelly. Kelly and I. So person A and person B, right? We have some kind of conflict between us. And we're in our culture, something's going on between us. And so who does person B go find?
Person C.
Person C, right? And so I come over here and I'm like, hey, Tim. This is usually how it goes. Tim, can you believe Kelly? Yeah, that's usually the way it starts, right? Is this, you will never believe this, right? And I start saying, oh, Kelly is so, can you believe what she did? Can you believe the decision we made on that project? Can you believe, oh my gosh, our entire company is, the ship is sinking. I mean, this is awful. She is an awful person, right? All of a sudden it's, you're not really, but play along here. And all of a sudden this happens, and this happens in every group dynamic on the planet, every single dynamic on the planet. But person C plays an enormous role in the health of that culture moving forward. And if there's not clarity around the temperature we're trying to set, and there isn't clarity around accountability of the single biggest problem with communication is the illusion that's taken place, if we aren't proactively modeling and shaping and talking about how we communicate with one another, then person C plays an enormous role, which we all, by the way, you all in this room find yourself in the position of person C all the time, I'm sure. But person C typically goes one of two paths, right? The first one is what I refer to as the throw the gas on the fire approach, right? Which is like, Tim says back, Jason, are you serious? Kelly did what? It's like, oh my gosh, that is awful. That is so bad. Like, she said that, and oh my gosh, you're right. I see why you're pissed, right? And this company is going the wrong direction, right? And at the same time, all that Tim's doing is just throwing gasoline on the fire, right? And at the end of that exchange, then finally they're done, like in some sick way, Tim thinks, oh, well, he feels good because, Jason came to him, and so I feel like, man, I just really played that role. I let him vent, right? But in some sick way, like at the end of this exchange, is the situation better? No, right? In fact, it's worse because it's just kind of festering. Or person C says, oh, I'm sorry to hear that, Jason. Tell me more about how you're feeling. Tell me what did you see from your perspective? And absorbs it and says, I'm sorry you're frustrated. I see that you're feeling that way. And after they listen and seek to understand the situation, then they say, but I know Kelly. And I bet there's something got lost in translation here. I bet that's not what she meant. Or maybe I know she means well, And I know she has our best interest involved in mind. And so here's what I think is, it sounds like the problem's between you and Kelly. And what I think you need to do is you need to communicate this with Kelly. And oh, by the way, as your friend, I'm going to check back in with you in a week and see how that went. Is that realistic, what I just described?
100%. We have a zero triangulation policy in our business. That's exactly the conversation. We force people to have it. We force them to check back in, and it works.
Amen.
It diffuses a lot of stuff.
But Kelly could be a problem. She really could be a problem.
Hey, Kurt.
It's good that beings get together to try to get Kelly out.
Kurt, let's not bury the lead here. Kelly is a problem. No, obviously there are moments and there are times where there are people in your culture and within your system that are not committed to and are showing repeatedly over time they are not willing to be a part of creating the culture you want. And so what that means is it's time for them to leave. Right? But if they are committed and if they've shown a pattern of positive reinforcing of the culture that you want, then the success of this is we start to model and show places that this is how we communicate and the path we're going to go down together of shaping not just what we do, but how we're committed to doing the work together. And so is it realistic? Yes. Is it difficult? Yes. Is it possible? Yes. But it takes leadership. It takes intentionality, and it takes a commitment to saying we together are going to own not just what we do, but how we're committed to doing it moving forward. Let me give you a few final thoughts, and then we're going to leave a few minutes for questions, and we can talk about whatever it is you want. Any question you've got, I'm going to open book, and or anything that you're kind of wrestling with within your company, we'll do that too. But let me give you just a few kind of final thoughts before we wrap up. So I recently did I'm doing a number of different speeches and things at Wendy's. And I spoke to their top 250, I think it was, GMs around the world. So all these people that are running all these Wendy's across North America and Canada and different places. And I told them at the end of the speech, I said, I need to tell you a story. These are all people from Wendy's, right? I said, I need to tell you about a story from my wife's grandmother. And I said, you know, my wife's grandmother, and I've verified this now with all the family to make sure this is true, is my wife's grandmother, for more than 20 years, they've confirmed, has been going to the same Wendy's every single day. And when I shared that at Wendy's, you would have, I mean, the place erupted. It was like, yes, we did it, you know, like, we've converted everybody, like, yes, yeah, you know, people were going crazy, like, yeah. And so I started explaining, I said, every single day, she goes to this same Wendy's, and when she pulls into the parking lot, like, she doesn't even go to the drive-thru, they just kind of wave her ahead because, you know, they know what she wants, because she pulls right up to the window, and out the window, they hand her the same thing she gets every single day. They hand her a Diet Coke. That's it. Every single day for over 20 plus years, she goes there and she gets a Diet Coke, right? And as I talked to Grandma about this, I said, now, Grandma, let me explain something to you. You know there are other places to get Diet Coke, right? He said, you know, by the way, on this corner that you go to, like, there's a Taco Bell, there's old McDonald's, there's other places to get it. And then I really blew her mind because I was like, Grandma, there are these things, they're called grocery stores. You know, like, bah, you know, like you can buy it in bulk, and at a much more economical way. You could have Diet Coke in your basement, and you can have it whenever you want, right? But it's not about the Diet Coke. It's not. Because when I ask her, Grandma, why do you go there every single day? She says, because they're my people. They know my name. And what the people at Wendy's don't know, but they now know because I shared it with them, is that they don't know that there was many stretches of those 20 years, where her husband was dying of cancer. And my wife would, call her up and say, hey, Grandma, I'm going to come over, and you want me to swing by and get you your Diet Coke? And she'd say, no, I want to go. They don't know that for whatever reason, as weird as it seems to me or anyone else, that where she wanted to go is to get out of the house. She wanted to go to Wendy's because they knew her name and they were her people. And they don't know the impact that they had over the years. But you know what? Over the course of those 20-some years, it's not the same people at that Wendy's. The staff's changed. New people are coming in all the time, but all of a sudden there's a message and a story and a culture and a temperature that's lived on and passed from person to person, that it's not about the Diet Coke. It's about the fact that they went out of their way to say, oh, by the way, you're going to see today, Lois is going to show up. And how they greet her. And in some days they just said, don't pay for it, here's your Diet Coke. Thanks for coming. We'll look forward to seeing you tomorrow. That for 20 plus years, they've consistently been setting a temperature and creating an environment where it's not about the Diet Coke. You all know this, but your business is not about the Diet Coke either. And Plato was the one that said, what is honored will be cultivated. What is honored will be cultivated. So if what we honor as leaders is busyness, is I'm such a big deal that I'm running in every direction and nobody can ever get me to slow down and talk to me, and if what we honor on our team is just no, just results, do your job and shut up, right? If that's what we honor, then that is what will get cultivated, right? So what is it we want to honor? What is it that we want to drive? Not just what we do, but how we do it? And what's the process that we're willing to go on to then communicate that and develop that and lead that internally? Because what we honor is what will be cultivated. That's what will grow. And lastly, I'll just say this. We have to own it. I was at Southwest Airlines headquarters in Dallas one day, and Southwest gets celebrated for having this amazing culture, right? And everybody talks about it, but I can tell you this firsthand. The day I was there, we were all talking all about leadership and culture. They had the same poster on the wall, like 18 of the same posters right next to each other, like all around the room, where I was like, that's a bit much, but it was the same poster right next to each other. And in big letters it said, count on me to own it. Underneath, we are all ambassadors of our culture. And the reason why that was in front of everybody is because if you want to work at Southwest Airlines and you get through the 17 interviews or whatever it takes to get to the point where it doesn't matter if you're the ticket taker, the pilot, the HR, the maintenance person in the garage, whatever that is, if you want to work there, they sit you down on the 18th interview or whatever when they're about to offer you the job, and the job description for whatever the role is in front of you, and they push it aside. They push it aside. And they look at it and they say, we'll get to this eventually, like what you're going to actually do in this role, the tasks that we're going to ask you to do. But to be honest with you, it's not what's most important. We can find somebody to do these things. We can. There are humans out there that can do this. But what we want to talk to you about is this. And then they lay in front of them a description of the culture that they're trying to create tomorrow, out the windshield. Not, we were celebrated last year for being this best place, and here's all the things of where we've been in the rearview mirror. Here's where we're trying to go tomorrow. And here are the values that we think are going to drive that. And with specific language and link to action and behavior. And if you want to work here, then we got to be able to count on you to own it. Not rent it. Not think it's a good idea every once in a while. We got to be able to count on you to own it, because we are all ambassadors of our culture. And from that first moment of invitation into not just employment, but into owning and being a participant in the culture, then they say, now it's our role to walk with you, to train you, develop you, and to help you become an ambassador for the culture that we're trying to create. You all know this already, that you are the ambassadors for the culture that you want within your company. And the only way it begins to start being shaped next is whether or not you're willing to own it and be the first one to show up and say, let's start being thermostats together, because we're all ambassadors of our culture.